Welcome. You're listening to Literacy Now, the official podcast for the nonprofit organization Parents for Reading Justice, and I am your host, Brett Tingley. We are very excited to have with us today Dr. Kevin Gorman. He's the Upper Arlington Student Services Director and someone who has become my dear friend. We are excited to have him here today, and I wanted to just give you a chance to tell us a little bit about how you got into this work, Kevin.
I started a lot of years ago. I retired the end of July, so I'm no longer with Upper Arlington. I'm now an instructor at Capital University, and one of the classes I'm teaching is beginning reading and writing or literacy. And I really got involved in this with the whole dyslexia piece when I met with UA Kid 11 years ago. The second day on the job, well, prior to this starting and moving to Columbus, the Columbus area, I was getting texts from Brett, trying to set up a meeting. And so the second day of my job, I met with the officers from UA Kid, and they presented me with a badge, and they presented me with a list of goals that organization had. And as I read the goals, they all made sense to me, and they seemed logical. Also that year, I got involved with the Central Ohio Dyslexia Foundation, and I was a board member on that for a few years, and it just kind of whetted my appetite.
Well, we did try to meet with you very early on in your tenure at UA in order to introduce ourselves to you and share with you what our goals were and what we were trying to achieve. But we just couldn't have been more pleased with how you reacted and responded, and were very open and willing to learn with us, because science of reading in Ohio at that time was kind of new.
Yeah, and it really prompted me to do a lot more research, which was good for me and for my career and for just my general knowledge.
That brings up this podcast we are doing specifically for parents. And so it brings up a point. The people that we are working with are parents who are interested in bringing the science of reading to their district. And they may not always have, the districts don't know. Most people are not learning about science of reading in their college of education. And so parents are put in this awkward position of coming to the district and trying to talk to them about the science of reading and get them to be interested and look into it. What do you think are some ways for parents to approach the district administration, district leaders in a way that the leaders will be receptive to? What has been your experience?
I think going to the director of student services or special education might be a good starting place, and also ask to have the curriculum director there, because one of the things that we ran into when I started was that curriculum director at that point was going in a different direction than the goals of UA Kid, and it was a question of somehow trying to merge both philosophies so that we were doing what was right for children and teaching them to read and making them successful, because that's why we're here. The children are our customers.
Okay, and I want to put a big exclamation point on what you said, because I actually think that you are rare. In my experience, many times when you talk to district administrators, their customers are the teachers, not the children. And I find that astonishing. So to me, it's very refreshing that the children are your customers.
And the parents are our stakeholders. And I think if you think of it in those terms, I think you can make a lasting effect on a district.
Well, and you certainly did. So again, we cannot thank
We'll
you
see
enough.
it. We'll see if it holds. Well,
Well, we are working very hard.
I know you are. I know you
Yes,
are.
because that brings up another issue that, so I want to give them a little background. Many people have seen the documentary, and so we really had to kind of fight very hard to get people like Kevin in the district. But once we did, we were able to kind of help create a district that would help children learn to read, first through student services, and you're spearheading, you know, what are the things that you were able to achieve, kind of a bullet point. What did you do that really helped our kids? Because I know, but I want to see what you're thinking.
I think the first thing was that I was listening to NPR, and there was a private school that specialized in dyslexia, and they were giving out free CTOPPs.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I just had moved here. And all of a sudden, the next week, I went to work and it said, this child has dyslexia tendencies. And I thought, what's a tendency? You either have it or you don't have it, or is it mild or what? So I made the decision at that point, this was in July of, I think, 2012. I made the decision that as a district, we'd give the CTOPP to, and it wasn't a popular decision, I'll be honest with you, but you know, I retired after 45 years, so I've kind of got tough skin. I've been a high school principal. I've been a principal of a behavior school, and I've been a director twice. And it just made sense to me that, you know, you start out as quickly as you can, at least with one initiative. You don't want to bombard the district because change is difficult, especially in an institution like a school system, because they draw on back memories of when they started, as well as their university experience. And their university experience back then did not teach phonics at all.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
guess to me, the CTOPP was the biggest piece, because we CTOPPed all kindergartners.
yes.
And the first year I sent out a letter, I think it was in August, to all of the parents of incoming kindergartners and said, we'd like to do this. We're doing it for everybody. If you do not want it done, contact my office. And there was only one parent who said, we don't want it done, which was fine. But we did the other 300 some students. And the CTOPP is a longer test to give. It's one-on-one and it's 30 minutes. And so what we ended up with were some false positives for dyslexia, because we did it in September and it didn't cost the district money to administer the CTOPP. I did it around my school psychologist's time schedule. And usually school psychologists, my experience has been, they don't really kick in heavy duty except on reevaluations till like October. September, they'll probably do some reevaluations, but in terms of initial evaluations, they're not usually till October, because the teachers need to get to know the children. And so I use them to train other people on giving the CTOPP, and we actually went through trainings where we got subs, and that did cost money. And they came and the psychologist trained them on how to give it, and then gave them some results and had them try it and see if they got the same response. So we had some consistency, and that made a big difference. And after the first year or so, it wasn't a fight with my department at all. It made sense to them, and it made sense to the community as a whole, because we were looking out for their children right away.
And it made sense from a preventative. The whole thing is that we're trying to change the mindset. Even if you over-identify, or you're not even identifying, you're just over picking the kids that might need extra help. They don't don't have to be dyslexic. They could just be struggling readers. But
And you
if
still want to help them.
you want to prevent them from
Right.
failing, so important.
And years ago, when they were looking at somebody who had a specific learning disability, they used to have a discrepancy formula where they'd look at your ability, your cognitive ability, and they'd look at achievement in 7 different areas, 2 areas of reading. We'll just talk about that. And they basically, if you didn't have the discrepancy, then they didn't qualify you for services. This was probably 20 years ago. And if you didn't, you almost did a wait till the child fails before you intervened, and that doesn't help children. And that was the big difference with the CTOPP, because we were being preventative rather than reactive.
So you're preventing so much emotional damage. I just can't say how important that attitude is. Catch those kids. But then you rushed them with good, like Wilson Foundations. No, Wilson.
It was Wilson, and we already had teachers qualified for Wilson. Now, Wilson is scripted Orton-Gillingham.
Yep.
And it's a good program. The only difference that I really see between Orton-Gillingham and Wilson is the numbers. So in other words, with Wilson, it's scripted. So you'll start with a small group of students. Say you have 4 or 5 in a small group, which is wonderful. And the way Wilson works is you go through all of these lessons, and everybody has to pass the lesson before you go on to the next one. Well, the problem is, if you say you do this starting in September with a group of 5, and then in November or October, you identify one other student, you can't put that student in that same group because they're not at the same place. So that sets up another group and another possible scheduling conflict for either the Wilson provider or the student missing something that they need in the classroom. So Orton-Gillingham, we were really blessed to have a training center in Dublin, Ohio, which is just next to Upper Arlington. It's a suburb, and we started to use them as a training place. And the first year, I asked some of the intervention specialists if they would want to be trained, because it could change down the road their outlook in terms of what they were doing. And with individualized educational plans and evaluation team reports, there's a lot of paperwork. And teaching reading, there's paperwork, but you see the progress, and it's quicker and it's more satisfying, I think.
And I thought what was so brilliant of you, again, leadership is so important, and you were the right man for the right job at the right time. We were a district that reading recovery was initially tested in. So for years, our kids have been, I say, experimented on with reading recovery, which was horrific. And for a dyslexic child, it's not the best, shall we say. And so you allowed the intervention specialists, you offered them another tool in their toolbox, because probably if you had said, you are going to do Orton-Gillingham, you have to stop doing reading recovery, then they would fight it. It's like their instinct. But by offering them another tool, and then they choose what is better with a struggling reader, they buy into it.
That's basically what happened. But I involved the curriculum director, because that is a regular education initiative. It's intervention, but when you're looking at different tiers of intervention, that would be like a tier 2. So that would not be special education. So I was overstepping my boundary. So I met with the curriculum director first and said, I'll take it out of my budget. Why don't we pay for the reading recovery specialists to have this kind of situation? So I had the curriculum director set up the meeting, and then I met with all of them and just said, I've got basically a gift
Mhm.
that if you're interested, and they all were interested. And, you know, Orton-Gillingham has become a big business, and I'm pretty picky about what kind of a program you should go through. One of the things with the center in Dublin, Ohio, is they have a 100-hour supervised practicum.
So
You get, I get so many different internet ads on, you can get Orton-Gillingham and it's, you know, 30 hours of classroom instruction. Well, that's fine, but until you implement it and you have somebody watching you implement it and critiquing you, it's like student teaching. You can have the theory, but if you don't have the practice, it doesn't work.
yeah.
And
Oh, no.
so it's being careful of that you pick the right program, because right now, any kind of phonics has become big business, so you have to be very selective.
Well, and so to have the intervention specialist trained very, very well was really important, because the thing that I thought was so beautiful when we worked on our white paper was by giving the kids a CTOPP in kindergarten and picking out the kids who were potentially struggling readers and getting them good reading instruction early while their neuroplasticity is high and their little brains are malleable. You then did another brilliant thing by re-CTOPPing those kids who showed low phonemic awareness in kindergarten. You re-CTOPPed them in first grade. And
yeah, and anybody else who was new, who was at risk, to see if it was working. Because if you don't pre and post assess, and you need to use the same instrument or something very similar, so you're comparing apples to apples. And we looked at the standard scores, because then it doesn't matter who your publisher is. And it really, we saw those students do very well. And that was somewhat of a selling point. The other thing that we started to use was Foundations, which is a Wilson product, with the kindergarten teachers. And I basically talked with one or two kindergarten teachers at one school, and they were real interested. So we got them trained, and they did Foundations for a year. And then it kind of had a life of its own, because when these kindergartners went into first grade, the first grade teacher noticed that, boy, these kids are doing really well, much better than the class previous. And they said, what did you do different? And the teacher said, well, I did Foundations. And Foundations goes from basically preschool through grade 3. And so that made a big difference also, in terms of then the first grade teacher said, well, I'd like to try this. And then it kind of spread by word of mouth, and I could kind of take a step back.
Parents for Reading Justice is a nonprofit grassroots movement dedicated to ensuring every child learns to read by engaging parents and educators in adopting the science of teaching reading. Please watch our award-winning film, Our Dyslexic Children, take our master class, and to ensure all our services remain free of charge, please consider making a donation today, all at parentsforreadingjustice.org.
well, and I refer to it as kind of a Trojan horse. So from a parent's perspective, if I think the laws around children with dyslexia, specific learning disability, are very strong, and you can use those as a lever. But once you get good services in for dyslexic kids, and you get people who understand reading in the district, who've had 100-hour practicums in Orton-Gillingham, you're CTOPPing your kids, regular ed teachers are going to see that these children that they've had it's so confusing. How do you help these kids? All of a sudden, they are improving. And so regular ed teachers actually ask to pilot Wilson Foundations. And so now in Upper Arlington, kindergarten, first, second, and third, every single student is getting Wilson Foundations. I think they're moving into
They moved to another program, I think, which is fine, but it's comparable.
Yeah,
So,
and it's a
and the
little,
research supports it.
Yeah, but the idea that by kind of fixing student services, it sets that example, and then you can actually shift into and affect regular education. So kids who might not be dyslexic but still are struggling readers are going to benefit, and so it's such a win-win.
The other thing that I thought was really beneficial, besides UA Kid, was UA Kid had hired a wonderful advocate, and in Brenda Lewison, who
Angel.
about a year ago passed away, and she really knew her information. And it got to the point where when she first came into the district, I don't think it was real pleasant for her. And by the time, 2 or 3 years in, the principals liked having her sitting in the meetings because she could come up with ideas that weren't critiquing the teacher, weren't critiquing necessarily the curriculum. She was making some suggestions, and I learned a lot from her also. So she made a major impact on the district.
So glad that you mentioned her. She was an angel, and I met her a long time ago, and she taught me so much. And the reason that I think she was so effective, and the way that we described her style, was she was an iron fist in a velvet glove. So she was very, very knowledgeable on the law, on reading interventions, on curriculum. She was a teacher herself, but she wasn't rough or abrasive. The velvet glove was that she was very polite and respectful, but we all knew that the child was the customer, and that's who we were there to help. And she gently walked us all through, but she did help children. So,
and as a parent, if you're looking at advocates, you want a student advocate. You don't want necessarily a parent advocate.
Yes.
Because as a parent, even with my own children, I think I know what they need, but I may be wrong. Whereas a student advocate basically gets to know the children, and Brenda did that. She met with the kids, and in fact, the kids would end up calling her and asking for different things. So they really developed a nice relationship. And because she was a student advocate, I think, and focused, as you said, making the student her customer, it made a big difference, and kids got what they needed, and it wasn't a fight.
Well, that's also, though, a tribute to your leadership, because if your advocate is very knowledgeable and reasonable, and your student services director is very knowledgeable and reasonable, then it's amazing what you can do for children. So
it really made a difference. And truthfully, as I didn't come in with a plan to Upper Arlington, I think God kind of influenced me as to where I was going, because I wasn't that educated or that gifted in dyslexia when I came in. I feel like I'm pretty good now, but I still have never taken the training for Orton-Gillingham because I was looking at big picture. I wasn't looking at individual. My youngest daughter's an intervention specialist in Northwest Ohio, and she's gone through both the Orton-Gillingham program through the Dyslexic Center in Dublin, and then the advanced training. And so she's finishing up her advanced practicum now. So that's made a difference in Northwest Ohio also. So that's kind of nice.
Well, and, I think a lot of what we talk about is, if you make a difference in your district, then it will help the other children in that district. But then it also can have kind of a ripple effect, and other districts will hear about it, and then you can mentor them and it will help them. So,
that is kind of what happened, because I was pretty friendly when I was in Northwest Ohio. I had been in Sylvania City Schools, and I had been in Perrysburg City Schools. And I got to know Ottawa Hills very well. And at one point, the director, who used to work for me as a teacher at a behavior school, contacted me and said, we have a new superintendent who would like to talk with you. And so we had, at that point, there was no Zoom, we had a phone conference, and I kind of went through the process of what we implemented in UA, and they took notes, and then I assuming they followed through, but that touched Northwest Ohio also, so.
Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because we are going to be talking to the president of the Ottawa Hills Parent Group on the next or in a subsequent podcast.
Okay.
And they worked very hard. They also were in a district that really didn't know a lot about the science of reading, and they were able to flip their district. So thank you for working with their new superintendent to help them get up to speed, because I think they shared with their new superintendent, or maybe the old superintendent, our documentary and our case, what happened, what links we had to go to in Upper Arlington to get our dyslexic children served under federal law. And they were able to use that as, the carrot and the stick. The carrot was, we want to work with you and help you bring the science of reading. The stick was, this could happen to you here in Ottawa Hills.
I've also showed the documentary to my 2 different classes of students at Capitol, as well as Emily Hanford did a American Public Media program on it. She did a very good job and talked about dyslexia in general also. So they also listened to her and had to write papers on it. And I'm real fortunate that Capitol has had a phonics program in place before I got there.
Well, here, let's take just a second out and give a shout out for Capitol. That is wonderful. I know that Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati is doing very good work, and Walsh University. I was there just last week at a literacy conference, and they are also, I think they have a master's level course. They're the first in the state for a master's level dyslexia degree.
That's
so
wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful.
And the impact UA Kid made on the State Department of Education is really going to expedite this, because there is now a guidebook in place in the state of Ohio that was supposed to be implemented the 22-23 school year, but there was no funding allocated. I don't know if there will be funding or not, but now they have to start their training process next fall, 23-24. They extended it a year, but they modeled a lot of it out of what we did in Upper Arlington.
That was such a really important effort. So again, what we recommend and what we teach with Parents for Reading Justice is that parents coming together in a group professionally with a very clear objective, mission and objective, you can really get an extraordinary amount of work done. So we had Upper Arlington kids identified with dyslexia, or UA Kid, but then we also moved, we realized that we could help other districts. And so we organized OH, or Ohio Kid, where we're a coalition of 20, maybe almost 25 parent groups representing over 200,000 students in Ohio. And we were, I don't think it's too much to say that we were kind of instrumental in getting the dyslexia legislation passed, and then getting the dyslexia guidebook approved through the state school board, which was a whole nother.
That was difficult. That was very difficult.
Crazy. But so parents coming together and activating around this grassroots organizing, you really can, a lot of people say, oh, nothing will change, or you can't make a difference. And
you can make a difference.
I say you can. I do. So, but it takes a receptive administration. So we just, again, cannot thank you enough for what you did. Let's bring it down to a kind of a more personal level. And do you mind just walking through for parents how to you know, if you are thinking that your student is struggling to read, how do you approach the district? What do you, and how do you get, you know, an evaluation, or how does that whole process begin?
I would first start by calling the teacher and asking for a conference. And if you have any kind of work samples, or if your child is reading at home, and you record it so they can hear it. And if there's no fluency, if they're memorizing words rather than sounding them out and knowing what their phoneme or the sounds are, and how that connects to the letters of the alphabet. And you need to have that phonemic awareness first. But I would definitely, any kind of documentation you can bring, or ask the child to come in and read for the teacher, and say, and then have the child obviously go back to their special area or whatever they're in school, and say to the teacher, I'm really concerned. I'm suspecting that something else is going on, that there may be a disability here. And at that point, the district has to have a meeting within 30 days with all of the key players to determine if they think there's a disability, or if they don't think there's a disability. And I think the biggest thing is when you're evaluating a child, the reason you evaluate them is not to have them be placed somewhere, because special education is a service. It's not a place. And I think it's really important that you look at testing as gathering more information. And that truly is what testing is about. That you can't, as a classroom teacher, necessarily have all of the information. Sometimes it's good to get an outside perspective who can give and has been trained in giving standardized assessments to see where the child really is, and where the strengths and where their weaknesses are.
And again, that attitude is so important. That just, if we could clone you, we need so many more of you. Okay, so if you talk to the district and you say, I think there's something going on, they have 30 days to do
If
an
you use the word
evaluation.
disability, if you suspect a disability and you actually say that, the district has 30 days to meet with you as a parent and say yes or no. There should be a program in place with different tiers of support. There's 3 tiers. Tier 1 is for everybody. So if I'm teaching a unit to kids and half of them got it, half of them didn't, then as the classroom teacher, I need to reteach those who didn't get it, and then provide additional training or teaching for the kids who did get it, so that we're not holding them back. Tier 2 is you've tried all of that and that hasn't been successful. Tier 2 is a small pullout group, like when we were talking about Wilson. And then tier 3, then you start to really almost go one-on-one, but it is not special education yet. And if you're at tier 3, if you're still not seeing progress, and you don't go a year at a time in these tiers, you go about 3 to 6 weeks, and you have definite measures of what success looks like. Because if you don't have measures in place of what the success is looking like with this training, then you're going to be in the same boat you were before you started.
What if your district says, we've done an evaluation and everything's fine, but you think, no, it's really not fine. I have heard that you can have a district pay for an evaluation, an outside evaluation by a neuropsych. How do you do that?
Well, if you get the results of the evaluation and you do not feel they reflect your child, you can send a written request to your director of special education or student services and request an outside independent evaluation at district expense. And at that point, but you have to let the district assess first. And you just, when it comes around to, do you agree or do you disagree? As a parent, you would say you disagree. And at that point, then you send your written communication to the director, and then they will send you what the policy says and the procedures say and how much the district is willing to pay. And some districts will also give you a list of different clinical or psychologists who, specialize in that area. And then usually if a private evaluation is completed, usually the person who did the evaluation will come to the next meeting with the school and present their results. And I think that's really important, so the parent's not going by themselves.
And in your experience, that expert, that neuropsych, who is very well educated, their opinion and their recommendations should be heeded by the district.
Yeah, it should carry some weight because they are neuropsychs. They're not school psychs. And there's a difference in terms of the amount of training.
Yeah, because that was something that was shocking to me. I thought a school psychologist was like a psychologist, but I don't think, what kind of training does a school?
It's graduate training, and they get trained in all the assessments. They do an entire year supervised practicum full time.
Really?
Oh yeah. And so they are very well trained. The neuropsychs have done a lot of clinical things on the side that they allows them to also counsel. And we have some school psychologists who are neuropsychs, and they do counsel, and that's great. But the school psychologists, if you get too big of a caseload, they become more like test clinicians versus psychologists, because they're kind of cranking them through. And so you really want to, anything like when we did the CTOPP and those kinds of things, any kind of preventative thing you can do at the beginning will make a big impact. The last thing I would say is the other thing we did, and this is through, again, UA Kid, that made a difference, is on our enrollment forms. It asks, do you have a family history of dyslexia? Because it's genetically based. And even though somebody my age might not have called it dyslexia, even though it's been around since the 30s as word blindness, they will say, we'll be in a conference, and oh yeah, I struggle with reading too. And a lot of times the spouse will look at their partner and go, really? I didn't know that. And then it kind of opens up some good conversation.
Let me ask you too. This is something that's interesting to me. If you are in a school district, but your child is not yet in kindergarten, the school district can still help you if you think you might have a struggling reader. How does that work for a preschool age child?
Well, usually in preschool, most children aren't reading at that point, and it becomes more of a language difficulty. And when you look at children who later were diagnosed with dyslexia, a lot of them had difficulty with language development anyways. And I'm not just talking about saying your R's or different sounds necessarily, but more than articulation difficulties, more than just speaking, or they spoke later than the other children in the family. And so a school district is responsible from the ages of 3 to 21, according to federal law. So you can contact your director's office, or they'll have a preschool coordinator and say, I suspect a disability with my 3-year-old, and they will do an evaluation. It is not the same evaluation as you get with a school-age child, because obviously there's a lot of play-based kinds of observations. And a speech and language pathologist usually comes in and does some evaluations. And then that district has to offer some type of service or remediation for that child. And the earlier you start, the more successful you are.
Yeah, that is so powerful. I did not realize that. So I think, if there's anybody out there who has a preschooler who hasn't even hit kindergarten yet, you can still work with your district to try to intervene early and get some good.
Because dyslexia truly is a language-based disorder.
Yeah. Nothing to do with intelligence. Smart little kids.
Not at all. Not at all.
What about one of the things too that parents, it's very unfortunate, but talking about IEPs and IEP meetings, parents are sometimes made to feel that that they're not really a part of the team. So you go in and you might have your spouse with you. If you're lucky, you would have an advocate, and the district comes in with 8 people, and you feel outgunned. But truly, a parent
is part of the team and should be part of the team. And one of the things, if you have a child on an IEP, I'd be asking for is a draft of the IEP, at least 4 or 5 days, so you have time to review it and make sure this is the direction you want to go. And if not, then you can send back feedback to the intervention specialist and say, I'm not happy with this. What if we did this? And it becomes more of a negotiation kind of situation. But what it has done is it makes those formal IEP meetings less contentious and more of a signing celebration that everybody's on the same page. And if you go into a meeting and somebody's very angry, and you really have to kind of look at body language, if they're sitting back and they're crossing their arms, or you can see their face or their neck getting red, it's probably a good indication that we ought to stop the meeting and reconvene at another time. Because if you get angry, what ends up happening is the focus leaves the child and goes on the anger, and you don't accomplish what you want to accomplish in the long run.
I wish you were the student services director from the get-go, because we had knockdown, drag out 8-hour IEP meetings. I mean, just extraordinary. And legally, parents have to be a part of the IEP team because they have to sign it. And if they're not comfortable,
they're not comfortable, they just say, I'm not comfortable signing unless we meet and have some changes made. And truly, you could meet as a parent with just the intervention specialist on the phone or on Zoom or however you want to do it, to kind of talk to them as to what you were looking for and what you were hoping for in terms of measurable, achievable goals and objectives. And those achievable goals and objectives have to be based on baseline of where the child is performing, that the teacher should be getting before they write the goals and objectives, because you need the present level of performance, how the child is performing, has to tie in to what you're writing in goals and objectives, because that's what you write your goals and objectives from.
What about, there's a difference between an IEP and a 504. Can you talk about that so that parents just have a little familiarity?
There are 2 different laws to begin with. There was a guy in the 90s, and he's still written a lot of books, and I think he's still writing, named Russell Barkley. And he did a lot with attention deficit disorder, with or without hyperactivity. And they formed a group, and they wanted to get a law passed federally to allow accommodations. And there's a difference between accommodations and modifications. Modifications, you're changing the curriculum. A 504 plan will not allow you to modify, but they will allow you to accommodate. And basically with accommodation, you're leveling the playing field. And so you can have formal things like extended time, tests read aloud, those kind of
like a private room or a quiet place.
Yeah, where it's not distractible, because a lot of kids will take tests and they'll see somebody right away turn it in, and they figure they have to rush through it, and then they don't do their best on it, and you don't get accurate results. And so 504 came from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and that's how they got the law passed. They kind of put it under the umbrella of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, saying if you have a medical impairment and a disability is considered a medical impairment, it kind of fell under that umbrella. The difference with an IEP is you actually have a service provider who is going to be an intervention specialist or a speech therapist, somebody who's going to be providing direct services to your child, whereas a 504 plan is a regular education initiative. Your classroom teachers should be attending. And it's good to meet with the new teachers in the fall rather than do it. A lot of times districts will try to get it done in the spring before the fall because there's so many meetings in the fall. But the problem is if you don't have next year's teacher in the conference, you don't know for sure if that teacher thinks that's a good way to go, or he or she may have a different idea or a better idea to add to it. So if you have your 504 conference in the spring, then you want next year's teacher invited and to attend so that everybody's on the same page.
But an IEP and a 504 are both federal documents.
Correct.
And so if you have extra time on a test or a quiet room or a reader for an exam, they, even in the high school, they have to follow
They have to offer it.
Federal law.
Correct. And what I'm seeing a lot of high schools and middle schools doing now is they actually are just providing a universal design for learning, that they have a testing center. So anybody can go in and take it in a quiet setting. And I know in Arlington, they had it in both middle schools and the high school. And that there are a lot of people who just have anxiety who aren't on a 504 plan, who just need the quiet space where they're alone and they can think and talk. Some kids do better also if they can read it out loud because you're using multi-senses. They're talking, they're watching, they're reading, and they're hearing their voice. And sometimes that makes a difference too.
Sounds very civilized. I mean, you're not changing anything. You're just allowing them to take the test in a manner, the same test, but in a manner in which they can show what they really know.
Yeah. And really, that's what assessment should be, is you're checking yourself as a teacher. Are they getting what I'm teaching, or do I need to be teaching in a different way so that these children understand the theory or what I'm teaching? One size does not fit all.
Well, I want to talk about one other thing that I was really proud of that we did together. UA Kid approached the new superintendent about the time that you came on board, or maybe slightly thereafter, and said, you know, we have this organization. The reason that we kind of got sideways with the district was because we were not communicating. And we want to partner with the district in this whole science of reading journey together. And so let's form something called the Dyslexia Task Force, where members of UA Kid at the highest levels meet with members of the district at the highest levels 3 times a year. And each one of those meetings, we meet to continuously improve the services for our dyslexic children. And it turns out regular ed children in the way that they learn to read and how literate they are. And I think that because the idea that research continues, science is learning new things all the time, and that we will continuously improve
And change.
It's very important.
I agree. And you would want your physician to do the same thing.
So not only band together to move your district to the science of reading.
And be proactive,
yes,
rather than just reactive.
Yes, and then stay together to continuously improve. Because the thing for me that I finally realized is that teachers and educators are very underpaid for the work that they do. They are worked to death. They are not appreciated nearly as much as they should be for the work that they're doing. I don't know what is more important, maybe, you know, except curing cancer, than helping children learn. This is our future. But they are just run to death. So by creating something like the Dyslexia Task Force and meeting once a quarter with the district, it helps it be on their priority list. You know, there's so many things coming at them. If we're meeting with them on a regular basis, then they're updating things and they're thinking about these issues. It just creates space for this continuous improvement.
I think it also adds a history element for the district, because a lot of times you get a changeover in administration every 2 to 3 years and you're starting over again. But if you have parents who have been loyal to the district and they're still staying there, then they can bring in the history and meet with the new administrator and say, this is what we've accomplished so far. How do you want to handle this in the future? And get them to be a part of the team.
That is so true. That is another thing I have discovered, is that the district leadership is changing. People are either moving or coming in or going out. And once you get somebody trained up, they leave and you got a whole new one.
Yeah, and there have been some articles that the districts that can keep people beyond their retirement truly seem to progress faster because they have the history.
This is just my personal opinion, but I think the district should hire you back as a consultant because you definitely have the history.
Well, I do have the history, that's for sure.
Okay, so the final question, I just always want to give our guests an opportunity. This podcast is specifically for parents. Many of the other podcasts are for, teachers or administrators or educational foundations, but there's really nothing just for parents. So if you had anything to say to parents in this whole journey with their kid, what would that be?
I think it's to keep your focus on your child and what that child needs, not necessarily what you think the child needs. And when you go in, don't go in with boxing gloves or anger, because then everybody gets defensive and we lose the focus of the child. And if you find yourself getting upset, then it's time to say, we need to take a break. When can we meet again? And schedule a meeting in that meeting, because scheduling meetings and getting everybody's calendar together is difficult and time consuming, and you could have a month go by. So if you're all sitting in the meeting together, then you have a plan. And in the meantime, see if you can meet with your intervention specialist or the classroom teacher in advance in a one-on-one kind of situation, almost like it wouldn't be a pre-IEP, it would just be a pre-meeting, so you can talk and share what you're looking for, and the teacher can talk and share what he or she has found out, and then together blend a good program for your child.
Sounds like perfect advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Take care.
Literacy Now is a podcast designed specifically for parents in our effort to ensure every child learns to read. Parents deserve a seat at the table, and we bring their voices to the fore. We invite you to join the Parents for Reading Justice community on all of our socials, and make sure to visit our website to watch our documentary and to take our masterclass. All of our content is free of charge because every child deserves to learn to read. This episode was brought to you by parentsforreadingjustice.org, produced by Brett Tingley and Keita Mascaro.